Alright, so today we're going to talk about Trailblazer no crank. A lot of people are stuck in that old school method where you have a power lead that goes up to the ignition switch, and when you hit crank, then there's a power lead that goes from the ignition switch down to the starter. But in these trucks it just doesn't work like that. So I have the diagram here in front of me. And you don't have to be an electrician to get the gist of this. When you go to the when the key goes to the start position, it sends power through this fuse and down to not the starter but the PCM. The PCM sees this, and that with other information from like pass lock and stuff, it'll enable the starter enable relay control. It'll just ground that, and that goes right up to the starter relay. So the best thing if you have a no crank is to start here at the relay, see what's missing, and work your way back, whether you have something, I don't know, here, here, here. I'll lift up the fuse box cover. Mine's a little fancy, but the gist of it is the same. Get this rascal out of the way. So the only big relay in here is the starter relay. It's this guy right here. We're going to go ahead and pull him out. Nothing fancy, just got 4 cavities. Now in this diagram I've set it up so that this is what the 4 cavities are, and this is facing the front of the truck. So you'll have your 4 cavities here, and over here you'll have the same 4 cavities. So we're going to go ahead and test them. I have a host of tools for doing this, but for this one we're just going to use a standard 12 volt test light, nothing fancy. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn the key to the on position. You see how thin these relay little leads are? If I were to shove this thing down in there, the chances are it would spread the terminal in the fuse block, and I'd be in a world of shit. I salvaged one of these pins from a door harness or engine harness or some shit, and you can tell it's pretty close to the same size. So if I shove this down into the fuse block, I'm not really going to do any damage. So I'm going to hook up my test light to the ground. Make sure it's hooked up properly. Oh yeah. And what I want to check for is power on the 2 contacts back here. So we've got our little test lead plugged into this, and we have power. We're going to move it over to the next one over. Same deal. We've got power. That leaves us with the 2 cavities left. Now one is going to be grounded when the key goes to start. That means the PCM sees the crank request. Did I say request?
Yes.
That means the PCM sees the crank request, and if conditions are right, it'll ground this. So what I'm going to do is put my lead in there. I'm then going to hook up the test light to the positive battery post. I'm going to take the camera. Miss Barber is going to turn the key to start.
Crank it?
Yeah. Let go. Hit it again. Let go. Now what we saw was when she turned the key to crank, we had this ground request right here. So now we know that we have power, power, ground. In this case, we would isolate from the fuse block to the starter, and it would just be this circuit right here.
Show that circuit right there again.
So it would just be this circuit right here is all that's left. So if we still didn't have crank, but we knew we had our 2 powers up top, we had our ground request when the key was turned to crank, what we're going to do is we're going to jump from 87 to 30 and see if we can make the motor crank. We're going to do this with the key on. Now I only have one of the little leads, so I'm gonna have to kind of improvise here. But what should happen is, if we go from this bottom right terminal and we plug this into the top left, the motor should like attempt to crank. If it doesn't, then you know you've either got a problem with the starter or the wire from the starter up to the fuse block. So I hope that this clears up any misconceptions about, you know, how the starter operates in these trucks. Like I said earlier, man, it's not, you know, it's not old school. There's not a wire that goes from the ignition switch right down to the starter itself. I mean, there's a lot more involved. So is that everything? We showed the inputs, we showed how to jump it, we showed the key on PCM request, and yeah, I guess that's it for that. So we're gonna call the starter test a wrap.